Been a few weeks since we were in the Christian Doctrine book. I believe we're on page 33. Yes, it's page 33. We had been talking about no denominational organization. Of course, Christ is the head of the church. But within the local congregation, well, let me go back, and since Christ is the head of the church, Christ being in heaven, there can be no earthly headquarters. And since we went over that more extensively already, we won't repeat those, but within the local congregation, there is then a plurality of elders. They must meet the qualifications as set forth in 1 Timothy 3 and Titus 1. We talked a little bit about those qualifications, but since Tim's going to be teaching that now in a couple of years, we'll forgo studying each one of those. But other than the special qualifications dealing with the family, all of those qualifications are Christian principles that every Christian needs to have and possess. But where Christ is legislated, the church is obligated to obey without question. But there are matters of judgment or opinion wherein Christ did not legislate specifically. Everything that we do must be done by the authority of Christ, Colossians 3:17. And so we must have authority for it. But within that which Christ has legislated that we must do, those things that are mandatory that we do, they're requirements, there are areas of judgment. It might be my judgment that meeting on Sunday morning at 6 a.m. or 5 a.m. would be really good. I don't think a lot of people would agree with my judgment on that. But I'd be asleep then. But that's what I mean. There's areas of judgment in that. In those areas of judgment where Christ is legislated in fulfilling that which Christ has obligated us to do, the elders oversee or they rule in those areas of judgment. And we as members of the congregation must submit to the eldership. Each individual elder must submit to the eldership. I have seen and had experiences where you have an elder who objects to what the elders have decided. Always causes problems. And that elder, when he causes problems like that, is subject to withdrawal of fellowship for his causing division. He needed to learn to submit to the eldership as a whole. No one elder can make the decision for the eldership. And yes, I've been in places where there was a one-man rule. Whether intentional or not, that's the way in which it ended up. And whatever this one elder said, that's what was decided. And I'll even give this illustration. two of them decided they wanted to have a gospel meeting. He was out of town at the time. When he comes back to town, that gospel meeting, that decision was changed because he didn't want one. And that's a long story that's not necessary for the purposes of the lesson. But you had one person ruling the congregation. That's unscriptural. It is an eldership as a whole, and no one elder has any right or authority to make any decision relating to the congregation. It is the eldership as a whole. But these are matters wherein God has authorized, but then the elders rule in those matters of expediency. These are matters of expediency in fulfilling what God obligated us to do. A lot of it does boil down to common sense. That's true. But, for example, God told us to support missionaries, basically, put it that way. Which missionary are we going to support? I may want to support missionary A, and somebody else wants to support missionary B, and someone else C and D, and you'll have almost as many different ones as members of the congregation. Who makes the decision? No one individual does. It's the eldership. And maybe they decide on more than one. But it's their decision to make. And I'll get off on the hiring of preachers, because it's so ridiculous the way in which so many congregations hire a preacher. They will have and yes, it's called this, a preacher parade. Now, what is a preacher parade? That's they'll have one preacher after another, after another, after another, after another. And finally, the congregation gets so tired of the preacher trying out every week or every few weeks that whoever is the last one that tried out is the one that's hired. Now, that won't happen 100% of the time, but I guarantee you it probably happens around 75 or 80% of the time. When the elders here hired me to come. I was the last one. I was also the first one. The elders had discussed it with other people and gotten feedback from other preachers and people that they trusted. They called me and offered me the work if I wanted it. Of course, I didn't want it, so I didn't come, and all of this is a bad dream, a nightmare, but no. Dale?
I know this is probably a dumb question, but I'm going to ask anyway. Have you ever seen an example of a diabetes in your lifetime of vision?
I think I described one a while ago.
Oh, okay.
I've seen plenty. Yes. But there's plurality of elders in each congregation who oversee the congregation. Then there's also deacons. Our book puts it, to assist the elders in material affairs, there was a plurality of deacons. I don't really agree with that. I don't find any scriptural backing for that statement. the deacons are servants. Serving in what area? Whatever area the elders assign them. The elders give them we want you to work in this area. Does not have to be in the material affairs of the congregation. It can be in other affairs. It's whatever area the elders give them an assignment to work in. Let's see, Brother Elward served as a deacon here he said he doesn't know. It was so many years that he doesn't even know. It's a lot of years. He was among the first ones, okay. 65? Okay. I know when I came, and the entire time that I've been here, part of his work was dealing with the worship service and getting people assigning people as to what to do, and as to serving at the table, as to leading prayers and such like that. That's not material affairs, that's spiritual affairs. And I believe rightly so. That's why I say I don't find any scriptural backing for the idea of simply material affairs. It is any affair in which the elders assign them. It always uses deacons in relationship to the plural as well as the elders. Philippians 1 and verse 1. Paul and Timotheus, the servants of Jesus Christ, all the saints in Christ Jesus, which are at Philippi, with the bishops and deacons. There you have the organization of the church, the local congregation, the congregation at Philippi. You had all of the saints. You had the bishops, that's elders or overseers, and you had deacons, those who are servants or who meet. And again, we'll say this in a second, but the qualifications. Our book then mentions Acts 6, verses 3 through 6. I do not believe that the men who were chosen in Acts the 6th chapter were deacons. Did they serve the congregation there? Yes. Did, in the selection of those 7 men, did they give them the qualifications that are found in 1 Timothy 3 for deacons? No. That's why the main reason that I would say that I do not believe that these men were deacons, as we would see there in Philippians 1 and verse 1, or 1 Timothy 3. Otherwise, you would have 2 totally separate and different sets of qualifications for deacons. Because qualifications in 1 Timothy 3 and Acts 6 are not the same. So how do you reconcile that if you're dealing with the office of a deacon? I don't see how you can reconcile the two. But there are some principles that we can learn from Acts 6 chapter. They're told to look out among themselves. 7 men, honest report, full of the Holy Ghost and wisdom, to appoint over this matter. The matter was the Grecian widows were being neglected in the daily ministration. So they selected 7 men. But 1 Timothy, the 3rd chapter, verses 8 through 10, and you could go through verse 13, in reality, also sets this forth, and there you have the qualifications in relationship to deacons. There are groups today, and many congregations of supposedly the Lord's church. They have Church of Christ on the building and advertise themselves as such, who are appointing women deacons, deaconesses. One of the passages, Romans 16 and verse 1, talks about Phoebe, who is a deaconess of the church, in the church. Word deacon, diakonos in the Greek, very simply means servant. If it's in the feminine form, then it's a woman servant. We're all to be servants in that case. That's what she was. She served the church. That does not mean that every Christian is a deacon in the sense of 1 Timothy 3 in that office or that work of a deacon. And she did not meet those qualifications. She was not a husband of one wife. No woman today would be the husband of one wife. So no woman can meet the qualifications that are set forth in 1 Timothy 3 in relationship to the deacons.
They also have to be proven. You got to know more about the person you want to be than just what about it? You got to prove.
Yes, verse 10 of 1 Timothy 3. Let these also first be proven or proved. Notice that it says, let these also first be proved. It doesn't let them say, let them be appointed and then prove themselves. How many times have we seen that? And I won't extend that, at least right now, to Bible class teachers. Well, if we can get them teaching Bible class, we'll get them to be here all the time. No, that's not the purpose. But first, they're proven before they're appointed. Any other questions or comments about that?
I would like to add something. Central, the deacons, that office was more or less to help the other members of the church, especially the widows, and they couldn't. I mean, like, I watched Virginia work. I called one of them and told them, and they came right over to the house and got the washing machine fixed. Now, is that wrong in the qualification?
Is that wrong in the qualification? It would be a matter of judgment as to helping someone. But as far as the work of a deacon, that should not, things like that should not be included in the work of a deacon necessarily.
That's what I'm
as far as their helping and they're assisting other individuals, members, certainly.
Well, they, anybody's got in trouble, and I just wondering if that was,
But
it's not a qualification. I always, that's what they were told, the elders told them to do.
well, again, that's a matter of judgment to a great extent. Obviously, they are servants, serving in whatever area the elders assign them. If they meet the qualifications, and yet they can do this work, then yes, the elders could assign them to do things like that. In Acts 6, even though I don't believe they're deacons, and 1 Timothy 3 aspect, they were to help the widows who had been neglected in that daily work of feeding them and ministering to them. So there was a physical aspect in relationship to their work. It was.
I never did use them that much, one time, but I knew that they were told anytime that was what our office was, to help anybody that needed help.
And as I say, that's more a matter of judgment than anything else. It could be spiritual matters, it could be physical matters. Both of them would be included.
Taking care of a physical matter, like you said,
Anybody can do that.
just ask him who would like to do that, but not as a qualification.
Right, not as a qualification of a deacon, but anyone can do it.
It should be wanted.
Should have that desire to help people. Any other questions, comments on this? Because there's a lot of error, even in the Lord's church, in relationship to the organization of the church. I ask, if you don't have men qualified, should you appoint men as elders? No. Is it scriptural if you do not have elders? When Paul established congregations in Acts 13th chapter, they did not have elders at that time. When they went back through those cities in Acts chapter 14, though, that's when they appointed elders. So for that period of time, however long it was, from the establishment of that congregation to Paul's visiting them again, they did not have elders. They were scriptural, though. Tim?
The congregation in Denver, there were 3 men. 2 of them were wise enough to be bachelors.
Have difficulty having an eldership, plurality of elders there. Can't happen. And yet it's a scriptural congregation. It might not be God's ideal situation, but it's still scriptural. If a congregation does not have elders and says, we're not going to have elders, then that's not scriptural. And yes, I know of congregations that the preacher rules, he likes to rule, and he's going to make sure that they don't have elders. There's been a lot of preachers through the years like that.
That would be like Cora, Nathan, and Byron shoving their will down people's throats. In the Old Testament example,
I don't think,
I ain't exactly the same thing.
yeah, I don't think that one really is parallel. You would have more a parallel with Diotrephes in 3 John 9.
Anybody's ever been sitting on a business meeting, now elders, they can go on forever. You'll go over the same thing 4 or 5 times after the
Mhm.
same.
That is true. I had a good friend, he's passed away now, who said, I try and make sure there are no business meetings. They didn't have elders, but he tried to make sure there were no business meetings, men's business meetings. And it wasn't because he wanted to run the congregation. He knew the problems with business meetings. And that leads to the question as to how do you decide things in a congregation without elders? And don't ask me because I don't know. I can tell you what most congregations do, and if I ask a few questions, they're not going to be able to answer them because most congregations use that men's business meeting in which all of the men vote basically on what they do. And should we include those who aren't there for that business meeting? Should we include as the same weight this 12-year-old boy who's been baptized into Christ and thus a Christian man, biblical definition, having the same weight and decision as someone who's an experienced man who has been a Christian for 40, 50 years? Should we have this new Christian who may be older in age but has no or very little Bible knowledge, who has just become a Christian, to have the same weight as someone who might be 30 or 40 years old, young man still, who knows the Bible and knows what's going on in the brotherhood? And should they have the same, carry the same weight? I don't know. So I say, I don't know the answer. But I also know that those who confidently affirm, well, it's got to be a men's business meeting, don't really have all of the answers either. Some want to include the women. I don't have any problems including women in those business meetings as long as when it comes to making decisions, they remain quiet. Now then, if you can get that and accomplish that, that's a whole nother matter. Because they should not be the ones making decisions. Just like I don't have any problems a woman coming and giving me her opinion on a subject. That's fine. When it comes to making the decision, that's the decision of the eldership, though. Here. That would be the problem. 1 Corinthians 11, verse 3 sets a matter of authority. Father, Christ, man, woman. And so it would be usurping that authority. Carl?
Where I was raised, we didn't have elders, we had men's meetings. And they were smart enough to come up with a criteria to go by that would shortcut one hassle of discussing. You know, You know, and so, yeah, we have criteria that they have to go through to even get some subject brought before me. You know, if somebody had an idea, they'd sit down, they look at the idea, go through the criteria, did it pass? Okay, now we can decide if we want to do it.
And I've even seen those who have such criteria and even have, here's what we're going to discuss, and invariably somebody will bring up something and it will be discussed also. I'm just saying there's going to be difficulties however you do it. That is probably one of the better ways to have a set of criteria, but still you're going to have problems.
I mean, when the problem came up, like somebody tried to start something like that, this was a criteria that was agreed on. So we go by it regardless, and then certainly, you know, if you didn't like it, that was tough.
Well, and I've seen others where it doesn't work. If it did in that congregation, fine. But there's others that it doesn't work in. I know of congregations who there was some rumbling about getting rid of a preacher, and so they had a business meeting about it. It was decided that he was preaching the truth. There was no reason to get rid of him. And so that was decided, right? Until the next week when they had another business meeting, or maybe it was the next month, and all of a sudden all of these people show up who had not been in that building for years. And they wanted to vote as well. And they got rid of the preacher. So you have all sorts of problems when you don't have elders.
Right, and then one of the criteria was we would agree upon whatever it was at that meeting. You're not gonna take it home with you and discuss it with your wife. You're not gonna take it home and discuss it with your neighbors. It was gonna be agreed upon right then, so you didn't have all this.
And if it works, that's fine.
Yeah,
But for every time that it works, you can probably find 5 that it doesn't work.
but I mean,
So I'm just saying, there's problems. And congregations have to work it out themselves as to how they do things. I'm certainly not wise enough to be able to say this is the cure-all for all congregations that don't have elders. I think I'm wise enough to say I don't know on that. But there are a lot of difficulties along those lines. Then, no denominational worship. And by that we mean there's no, these rites, these ceremonies, forms that denominations go through in their worship, don't have that. No sunrise Easter service. Well, the Lord's church doesn't, but there's a lot of denominational churches of Christ now that are starting to do that. Honoring military people, that's another biggie. And since you mentioned that, there are certain songs in our songbooks that are nothing but nationalistic songs. They're not a psalm, hymn, and spiritual song. They're a nationalistic song, and we shouldn't be singing them in our worship assembly. Singing them outside the worship assembly, that's fine. Nothing wrong with it. But when we gather together in worship to God, those songs are not appropriate. Should not be sung. Don't have, since we just went through it, a Christmas service. And now then, there's a lot of congregations who will put a Christmas tree out in the foyer and things like that. And I'm not talking about just denominational groups. I'm talking about groups that have Church of Christ on the sign, that were at one time solid, faithful congregations.
Some of them even have Santa Claus give out gifts.
Yes, Santa Claus giving out gifts.
They were on television.
What a picture for the denominational world as to what worship is to be all about. Which gets to that next point. He mentioned no pastor's day. And yes, I've seen it where they have a day honoring the preacher or honoring the elders or all of this. And that's what their service is all about. Well, if you want to talk about preaching the gospel, and that he in that preaching of the gospel is to preach the word, be instant in season, out of season, reprove, rebuke, exhort, with all long suffering and doctrine. You talk about the work of the preacher, that's fine. But it's not. It's directed toward the preacher or the elders or pastors instead of directing our worship toward God. And that's where the problem resides. These days in which, or worship services in which we honor the military, I appreciate what the military does for us. But we're not to have those type of days in which we honor men. Our honor is to be toward God, not toward man. We change the direction of our worship from God to man, and it's sinful. There's a lot of those type of denominational services that even made their way into the Lord's church. I say the Lord's church advisedly, because they quit being the Lord's church. And their candlestick has been removed if you read Revelation, the 2nd chapter. And by the way, since God has removed their candlestick, we shouldn't have any fellowship with them. And when you start doing that, then others get upset at you. They don't like that. But we are to seek to worship God in spirit and in truth. In John 4, verses 23 and 24, sets forth three great principles for us as far as worship is to be concerned. The first is that it's directed to the Father. And that's really what we were talking about a while ago. We changed the direction of our worship so many times to worship man instead of God. We glorify man instead of glorifying God. Our worship is to be directed toward God, not man. It doesn't mean that we won't receive benefits from that worship of God. We do. But it still has to be directed toward God, our praise toward him. It must be done with the proper attitude. That's the spirit. Proper attitude of mind, proper attitude of what we would say heart. It bothers me that so many times in our worship we are not thinking about what we're doing. We sing a song, for example, that we've sung hundreds, if not thousands of times. And we can sing that song without even thinking about it. And we do. Have you ever sung a song and then, what did I just sing?
What stanza are we on?
What stanza are we on? Yeah. Because our mind has wandered off. And I've got to admit, I've done that. It's easy to do. But when you do, you're no longer worshiping God in spirit. And thus it's false worship. And then 3, in truth. John 17 and verse 17. Says, to sanctify them through thy word is truth. God's word is truth. Thus, when he says we worship in truth, we worship according to God's word. What does God say as far as worship is concerned? Are we doing what God says as far as worship is concerned? Give you something to think about for next week. Can you find any specific action that is called worship in the New Testament? Study that. And then you can also study along with that, how do we determine if an action is worship or not? So those are your 2 assignments for next week. Yeah, this will be on the test. The test that will be next week, Lord willing. Those 2 questions. It's an interesting study, but also an important one. Because if we're going to worship in truth, we better know what the truth says about it. And then our book says that on Sunday, our worship consists of, and we're going to go through next week, those aspects of worship. I don't particularly like anymore the idea of saying Sunday. I'm not saying that it's wrong. I just don't like it. I'd rather say the first day of the week. Why? As I was doing a little bit of research, this was a long time, probably a few years ago, I came across the fact that there are nations whose first day of the week is Monday. I was shocked. I did not know that. On Monday. The last. A lot of our calendars are arranged that way. I also then found out that a lot of nations, their first day of the week is Saturday.
Really?
Yes, really. Again, I was shocked. Didn't know that. What day should they worship on? The first day of the week. If I say that, I know it's right. The Bible never says Sunday. It says first day of the week. So if I use that, that's fine.
Yeah, I don't think the Bible would use Sunday because it's ethnic religion. Some worshipers.
It was, in fact, the The early church, those who wrote about the church in the early days, they never used the term Sunday for that very reason, because it was associated with the worship of the sun in the air, not the Son of God, but the physical sun. And so they never used that term. They always used first day of the week.